This is the primary situation in which the commons now finds itself. A step away, not merely from the return to the respect it had half a millennium ago, not merely its ability to compete successfully, indeed with major evidence of superiority against owned production throughout the range of digital properties and digital assets in the world, but one step away from the achievement of the true communion that we have never previously in the history of humankind had, the commons of all the brains. You know what a lot of brains could do. You know why having more educated brains than any other will be the greatest source of power in the 21st century. You are watching as the two empires that tried to divide the world between them at the end of the 20th century are both failing to educate the next generation of their own populations, let alone doing anything to benefit themselves from the growth of the commons of all the brains in the world that can and will happen this next century. An extraordinary moment in the history of humankind is now upon us, and power is not ready. Commons is ready. We have always known what we were trying to do. We have always understood what our resistance was against. When it was our farmland, when it was our fisheries, when it was our woodlots, when it was our right to the traditional compensation for our labor, we had very limited tools with which to make the power of commons in production and distribution formidable to the competition presented by ownership. But we have already proven in the particular areas which were first reduced to digitization, or perhaps I should say amplified to digitization at the end of the 20th century, we have already proven the power of commons in competition with ownership. We are no longer at a disadvantage. The disadvantages that we face are the embedded distribution of wealth already existing and the idea of the ownership of ideas. If we attack the maldistribution of wealth by force, we will lose, as we have lost before. But if we cease to attack the maldistribution of wealth and go about the business of creating wealth for commons, and if we go solidly about the business of ensuring that every brain can learn, a claim that is not politically resistible later in this century, as billions of young people demand to learn, know that they can learn, are aware that all that stops them from learning is the ownership of ideas, a political claim that cannot be resisted. If we go solidly about the work of preparing for that completion of the commons of all the brains, then for the first time in the history of human beings, we will win. That's where we really are right now. Within some lifetimes in this room, we will see whether we have won. Not within mine, but within some in this room. It can be done. Commons has become active. It is no longer the passive traditional economy displaced by the superiority of ownership. It is now the new, the productive, and most importantly, it is the process that promises to allow every brain on earth to learn. If ownership tried to compete on that basis, it would fail. When every brain on earth does learn, it will fail. That's where our issues will be 35 or 40 years from now. And what we do in the next 2 decades will determine the outcome of that struggle. So what I want to suggest then is that a discussion about the patenting of software and the use of the commons in the current situation, highly valuable as it is essentially a tactical discussion, a theater strategy discussion. It occurs within the master strategy of the commons, not only to sustain itself against hostility, but to triumph. And it is only fully meaningful in relation to the stakes for which we are actually contending, which are the children we see around us every day and their ability to learn. Those are the forces at play now. Those are the results which we are seeking. Those are the aims of our activity. Others will speak today far better than I could do about how we will fight particular battles in particular places. But what I want to emphasize more than anything else is that we do understand commons as the force making its own destiny. We are no longer primarily acted upon. We are primarily the determiners of our own fate now. In this respect, what is happening in global information technology is still a forward demonstration, still a platform we can point to say, this will happen to you too. Whether what you are is my law school in the United States, or a movie industry in Hollywood, or a pharmaceutical company owning molecules, or even a genetic company trying to manipulate the ownership of genetic knowledge into the control of life itself. All of those processes will be disrupted by commons in the decades to come. If we mind our knitting, if we stay clear about what our objective is, if we understand the war aims of the struggle, if we don't get caught up in the trees instead of the forest, then we will use commons as the primary lever for the elevation of humankind. And we will see around us at the end of our lives that every brain is beginning to learn. And when every brain begins to learn and communicates with all the other brains, the fate of humanity will be different. Consider all of the problems currently facing the human race which ownership deals with badly. Ownership deals badly with issues of climate change and the ecological limitations on human expansion of welfare, because ownership prioritizes arbitrarily one point of view over all other points of view. Ownership prioritizes the short term over the long term, the immediate result over the ecological consequence. Repeatedly since the early 17th century, the capital intensification of production around the world has hit ecological limits. Marx and Lenin both presented theories of imperialism which essentially defined the motivation behind imperialism as the attempt to overcome ecological limitations presented by capital-intensive production, surplus value, if you please. But what happens to us in the 21st century is that we begin to see that the fate of the human race itself depends upon lengthening the horizon of our planet, beginning to crimp the power of short-term thinking as against long-term thinking, beginning to eliminate the biases that result from the arbitrary selection of certain viewpoints as privileged with the weight of their accumulated capital, all of which fundamentally depends upon bringing every brain online. All of which fundamentally depends upon networking human intelligences so tightly and so thoroughly that it becomes impossible to privilege particular points of view. Consider this in relation to the existing transformation of the press. It is harder than it used to be to have a slanted media environment. It is harder than it used to be to hold a party line. It is harder than it used to be to maintain the preeminence of a single entity's control over political conversation. I won't say that there aren't large and powerful societies on earth trying their hardest. I will say that they're having trouble, and they will have more as every brain begins to learn. And they cannot avoid educating all those brains, because without the education of all the brains, 21st century political economy begins to sputter. So what we are about will turn out, as time goes by, to be essential to the survival of ownership, just as we made free software essential to the survival of the hierarchical and ownership-based IT economy. This is not, in other words, a struggle in which what happens to our enemies is they get destroyed. This is a struggle in which they get absorbed. They used to co-opt us. Now we co-opt them. Commons is an active force. It makes value. It brings them to the value. The IBM Corporation didn't set out to destroy proprietary software. The IBM Corporation discovered that the destruction of proprietary software would aid its business, and it became our powerful ally at the very beginning of the process, and then all the competitors had to come along too. This is going to happen throughout the processes of production and distribution in the world as we build commons as an active force. So what I want to say, I suppose, is only this, that the most important production of commons is Einstein's. The most important distribution of commons is science and the way forward for the human race. The most important product of commons is our own survival. And there will be no competitor at the other end of this process, because there is no other way for every brain to learn and for the human race to survive. Thank you.